So our scripture today is James 3:13, and it goes through chapter 4, 3 through 7 and 8. Wisdom from above, it says in the Pew Bible. I kind of like that. It says, starting with verse 13, "Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth." You've ran across people like that, boasting about, "Look how smart I am," in so many words. Verse 15, "This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace." And then going on in chapter 4, it says, "What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions or your pleasures are at war with you?" In some verses, some translations, "are at war in your members, in your whole self, in your body. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. Submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you." You need to remember that part. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Excuse me. So I entitled this, "Smart or Not So Smart." Do I think I'm as smart as I think I am? The conventional wisdom I've always heard, maybe you have, excuse me, is that we only use 10% of our brains. Only 10% of our brains at a time. Well, it turns out this is a myth. In this lesson, as we listen to the Apostle James, he talks about two kinds of smart. Have you heard the business about how we use only 10% of our brains? Well, I certainly have. And I've seen a couple of, I guess you would call them sci-fi movies, where in the last 10 years or so, where, my goodness, I'm sorry, I got a frog. But in these sci-fi movies, somebody takes a pill or a shot, and all of a sudden they're exceedingly brilliant. That's what I need. But they really put it all together. And this works, of course, until the drug wears off. And then when the drug wears off, they're back to normal again. Everything they've ever had or read when they have this 100% brain power is instantly organized in their mind and available for them to use in whatever way they want to use it. And while they're taking the drug, they become such radiant and appealing persons that people are immediately drawn to them. And they catch with their entire mind. They just kind of like suck people in like a, I don't know, like a laser or something. You know, they just, oh boy, look at Roger, how smart he is. Well, wait till the drug wears off. Here it is in this cup, this coffee. wait till the coffee wears off. and we're shot. Of course, there's a wrinkle. There's the bad guys who want to get their hands on the drug, and they want to kill anybody else who might get a hold of it. You know, there's always that in the movie. If nothing else, these movies present one vision of what any of us might be able to do and how dazzling we'd be if we could use 100% of our brains. But here's the problem. It turns out we're already using almost all of our brain power. The old assertion that we're only using 10% is a myth. Now that we have better technology and they wire us up, you know, with PET scans, MRIs, etc., and search for brain activity, which of course they can do. Researchers have found that any mentally complex activity uses almost all the brain. So our brain is really a working instrument. It's not sleeping 90%. It's really hard at it. It's trying to keep us going, keeping us running. Our text says that even if we're brain smart, we might still be dumb. That sounds like James, doesn't it? I like James. We might still do some really stupid things, Roger. Some really stupid things. Yes, sir. In our reading, James talks of wisdom that it comes from above and wisdom that is earthbound. There's a difference. Wisdom that comes from God, and as we read in our lesson, wisdom from demons, wisdom from the earth, wisdom from one another. None of us is very good. In verse 16, James speaks of disorder, which theological commentator Thurston Moritz says is a reference to the schizophrenic situation in which Christians who are double-minded find themselves. When you're working on a sermon, you get carried away sometimes for hours, and you follow up on things. And I started following up on, well, just what is a schizophrenic situation? Oh my goodness! All kinds of craziness, goofiness goes on with your mind. And something like 1 in 10 people are bothered with it. Isn't that something? And most Christians who are double-minded, which is what James called us, most Christians that are double-minded find themselves in situations like this. They claim possession of wisdom from above on one hand. The Lord is sending me all this wisdom. And while on the other hand, they display the fruits of wisdom from below. Earthbound human smart isn't very smart, but it's shoved at us all the time. James, who was very concerned about how Christians behaved with one another in the faith community, saw that the community was fit and vigorous only when it was hyperlinked to divine wisdom. Divine wisdom. When we're tuned into God, that's when the wisdom was worthwhile. When we're tuned into the world. Have you watched the news lately? I mean, some of these channels on the news are just pure lies. I mean, they just bold-faced lies. I don't see how they get away with it. I don't know. I don't make the rules. But when I do, but it's just unbelievable. James's distinction between the two kinds of smarts is especially clear in the Message. If you've seen the Bible called The Message, Eugene Peterson paraphrased the Bible called The Message, and he did a really good job of it. It is not a translation, it's a transliteration. But I think he did a fine job on putting it together. Excuse me. So this is what Peterson had to say. He said, it's the way you live, not the way you talk, that counts. Mean-spirited ambition isn't wisdom. Boasting that you are wise isn't wisdom. Twisting the truth to make yourself sound wise isn't wisdom. It's the furthest thing from wisdom. It's animal cunning, devilish conniving. Whenever you're trying to look better than others or get the better of others, things fall apart and everyone ends up at the other one's throat. He continues, real wisdom, God's wisdom, begins with a holy life and is characterized by getting along with others. It is gentle and reasonable, overflowing with mercy. How about that? Overflowing with mercy and blessings. Not hot one day and cold the next. Not two-faced. You can develop a healthy, robust community that lives right with God and enjoy its results only if you do the hard work of getting along with each other. Is that hard? Well, sometimes it is. Sometimes it really is. I mean, Raymond and I don't get along at all. You know, it's hard work getting along with him. What do you think, Charlene? Oh, yeah, hard work getting along with Raymond. But seriously, you know, some people we really have to work at getting along with. I had a friend at work who had a little ice cream stick with a sign on it. And he shared an office with me. And he could see when I was starting to boil, shall we say. And he'd pull out his little ice cream stick sign. Of course, the person talking to me couldn't see it. Their back was to Gordon. And he pulled out his little ice cream stick sign and it said, bloody tongue. Do you have a bloody tongue? Can you bite your tongue instead of saying it? It's so easy to say it. It is so easy to say it. I'm going to hear this on the way home. Because I do have a case of non-bloody tongue sometimes. Don't we all? I can't accuse you of my shortcomings, but you know, sometimes we just you have to bite your tongue. That's all there is to it. And when it's put that plainly, we might want to say that this so-called earthbound smarts is not smarts at all. The earthbound smarts aren't very smart. And James acknowledges that when he says, it's the furthest thing from wisdom, it's animal cunning, devilish conniving. I mean, read what we just read. Demons, he said, devilish conniving. They're out to stir up anything they can do to destroy Jesus Christ and his ways. All they have to do is upset you or I. That's all they have to do. All they have to do is get us in a non-Christ-like mood instead of a Christ-like mood. And there we go. Are we acting like Jesus Christ, or are we acting like the devil? I mean, that's what it boils down to, quite simply. Animal covering, devilish conniving, James says. But you see, he's meeting people where they are, where even some Christians viewed people who were getting ahead by mean-spirited boasting, twisting the truth, putting one person against another as cunningly wise. Should we think different? It may sound strange to say that even some Christians admired such persons. But sometimes there's a begrudging admiration for the cons among us. Oh boy, did he get her? Oh boy, did she get him? I'll never forget, I went to a wedding when my best friend's brother got married. And the bride and groom are shooting darts at each other. Boom, 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 back and forth. I got news for you people, darts hurt. You may say it in jest. You may say it in fun. But darts hurt. When you throw a dart at me and it sticks, it hurts. And vice versa, I'm sure. And there's nothing the devil would rather do than have Christians throw darts at each other. Because darts hurt. And it can be all kinds of stupid, ridiculous things. It may sound strange to say that some Christians admire such people, but sometimes there's a begrudging admiration for the cons among us, or the bullies. I was reading a piece of a biography was written about Steve Jobs. I don't know, on some level, you have to admire the guy. His biographer was a fellow named Walter Isaacson, and he compares him to Thomas Alva Edison, the Wizard of Menlo Park. And the prolific inventor of a little more than 100 years ago, Edison was a 19th century Steve Jobs, you might say. Although Steve didn't like to be called a genius, he was. Jobs changed the world we live in, as did Edison. We can't go through a single hour anymore without being affected in some way by a product Jobs created. He created Apple, of course. I've seen you looking at the clock so far today. I've seen you looking at your cell phone. I haven't seen anyone text yet, but they probably have. You know, I don't want to hear that miserable sermon. Huh? We can't get away from it. You can't go an hour without somebody poking their thumbs on that thing. It just goes and goes and goes. He's taken over us. He actually has taken over us. Jobs actually changed the world that we live in. So how many have you become bored with the sermon so far today? And you've played with your cell phone or whatever else you might be playing with. And yet, as smart as he was, get this, as smart as he was a beast of human being to work with or for, Isaacson said. Isaacson cites colleagues, friends, family, and acquaintances, and the adjectives that come rolling off the tongue include autocratic, controlling, mercurial, temperamental, cold, absent, obsessive, distant, passionate, rebellious, and so on. Isn't that amazing? The man's biographer would write that. He shouted, he yelled, he badmouthed people, he misled. He was a jerk, Isaacson said. Velvety diplomacy was not a part of his repertoire. He was also one of the most influential people of the last 40 years. It's amazing, isn't it? Absolutely amazing. The good and the bad of it. The smarts from above, the smarts from below. Wow. His mantra might be identified by the ad campaign Apple ran for some time. It said, think different. Think different. Jobs knew that for Apple to succeed, the company had to not only have a kind of smarts that were unlike its competitors, but it had to encourage its customers to tap into their own creativity. So, what has happened? Let's face it, people, I drive an iPhone with 4 wheels. People have taken that iPhone, taken that computer, and they've turned it into what they could turn it into that were beyond his imagination even. I mean, they just pick it up and go with it. It's amazing. He spotted the wisdom in the idea that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, a word which itself is rooted in Greek Sophia, which means wisdom. So isn't it true that we're sometimes in awe of people who, on the basis of their brain power, carve out a money-making niche for themselves? People who think different, like Mark Zuckerberg launching Facebook from his college dorm. Jobless J.K. Rowling, I guess you should pronounce it, who wrote the Harry Potter series. She didn't even have a job. Look at her today. Huh? And Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started Facebook in Jobs' garage, working out of their garage. It's a kind of wisdom some of us might have, envy. Or how many of us said something like, I wish I had the wisdom to invest in one of their successful companies when it first started. I couldn't say no to that, probably. Would you like to add some Apple stock on day one? What we get from our text is that Christians don't automatically get a dose of heavenly smarts. It doesn't just come. The other kind of wisdom, the world's wisdom, too often predominates in the community of faith. And commenting on this passage, like Luke Timothy Johnson, he's an American New Testament scholar and historian, he says that James is addressing members of the Christian community who gather in the name of Jesus and profess the faith of the glorious Lord Jesus Christ, but whose attitudes and actions are not yet fully in friendship with God. But we're working on it, aren't we? We're trying to get there. We're trying to be Christ-like. Johnson's not condemning this congregation or any other congregation, but simply recognizing that the conversion experience is just the beginning. The conversion experience has to go on and on and on. I read this as a true story. I suppose it is. It says, one day Bowery Bum, his description, wanders drunk as a skunk into a downtown mission. Let's call him Frank. He's come to the mission for the free dinner but stays for the service. And when the preacher issues an altar call, this Frank finds himself going forward where a counselor prays with him. Well, that night is the big turnaround, as Frank himself describes it. And long story short, he goes on to recover and becomes a productive member of society. And though it doesn't always happen this way, Frank doesn't drink again after his trip to the altar. Now, Frank supposedly wrote this. But he says that in many ways his conversion was only a start. He felt that his sins had been forgiven, but in most ways he was the same self-centered, profane, bigoted, uncaring person he had always been. Except that now he was attending worship services where he prayed and started listening to God. And one by one, God revealed things to Frank that he needed to give up or rethink or do differently or take on if he was to continue following Jesus. And little by little, he began to make those adjustments, more conversions, if you will. He never said he had arrived, but he had a sense of where and toward whom he was heading. The point here is not the nature of Frank's conversion, but that he didn't get zapped with divine wisdom in some firestorm of heavenly magic. The appropriation of wisdom that is from above is lifelong. It's a lifelong learning event, and that should not discourage us, but animate us. C.S. Lewis puts it this way, using a house, a lifetime building project, for a metaphor. So C.S. Lewis says, imagine yourself as a living house, and you are, right? God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps you can understand what he is doing. He is getting the drains right, stopping the leaks in the roof, and so on, but presently he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make sense. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he's building quite a different house from the one you thought of. What's interesting is right next door to us, people let the house run down something horribly. The bank foreclosed. And there is a wrecking crew has come in, and they're totally rebuilding that house. And so as I was reading this story, here I'm hearing hammers going bang, 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 and they are totally rebuilding this house next door to us. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he's building quite a different house from the one you thought of. Throwing out a new wing here, putting on an extra floor there, running up towers, making courtyards. You thought you were going to be made into a decent little college, but he is building a palace, not next door to me. He intends to come and live in it himself. Isn't that what we have? We are a house God is rebuilding that house, and he's going to come and live in it. If current brain research is correct, we're already using most of our brains each day, but that doesn't keep us from being double-minded. Maybe we're only giving 10% of our thinking power toward living a holy life. That doesn't disqualify us from discipleship, but it gives us a lot of room for growth and lots of room for Jesus to build on. I think that's smart. What a day that will be. Yeah. Page 762 and 763. We might even do 763 twice.